Hi everyone, I hope you're having a good Lent so far. Today we're going to talk about the next section of Psalm 84. Here, the writer of the psalm is moving towards the temple. He's thinking about how beautiful it is, but now he's starting to think about all these little birds, the sparrows and the swallows that make their nests in the buildings of the temple, and underneath the roof and things like that. And he's thinking about how even they find a home there, and they want to be close to God, to where God's holy presence is. You might have heard the passage in the gospel where Jesus talks about the sparrows and how even though they're so small and seemingly insignificant, God cares for every single one of them, and not a single sparrow falls to the ground without God noticing it. Because in God's world, no one is invisible and no one is without importance, not even the birds, and especially not us. So let's take a look at these verses.
Even the sparrow has found a home, and the swallow a nest for herself, where she may have her young. My home is by your altars, O Lord Almighty, my King and my God. Blessed are those who dwell in your house. They are ever praising you.
That last line, blessed are those who dwell in your house, I'm not sure exactly what he was talking about. He might have been talking about the priests who lived in the temple area, or some of the people who served in the temple liturgy, like the women who wove the cloths for the altar and baked the bread that was used in some of the sacrifices. Because the overall temple courtyard area was more than just the building. It was actually huge. It was about 3 to 4 football fields size. And there were all these different buildings within the overall temple walls. So there may have been some people who actually lived there, and that might have been what he meant. Or he could have been talking about the birds and saying that the birds were praising God in their own kind of way. I kind of like to think that's what he meant. One thing that is clear is that the person who wrote this psalm feels like the temple is his true home, and that's because where God is his true home. And while he could pray and he could connect with God back home in his little village, he really wanted to be in the presence of God most fully by being in the temple. And so he wanted to go on this pilgrimage. A pilgrimage takes effort, it takes time, but it's worth it. And so that's why he wants to go. I'm going to ask you to think about something. Can you think about a time when you had kind of a God moment, when something just kind of breaks through that curtain and hits you, and you're like, whoa, this is real? And when I look back at the period from like my childhood up through confirmation, which was about 13, 14, I can think of 2. And I don't think it's a coincidence that both of those happened when I was in a church. I'm going to tell you about the first one. During one part of my childhood, my family was living in Huntington, West Virginia, and we had a Lutheran church. We were Lutheran at the time. We had a Lutheran church that was literally across the street from our house. Like, we walked out the front door and there it was. So that's where we went to church. And at that time, I didn't really pray on my own. I didn't think about God really, but we did go to church on Sundays. My mom taught Vacation Bible School. I sang in the kids' choir. It was just kind of a part of our life. So I remember this one time we were sitting in the church, and I was about 8 years old. I was looking around because, when you're 8 years old, it's hard to pay attention to the sermon. So I'm looking around at all the different things in the church, at the rafters in the ceiling, at the stained glass windows, and I'm looking at this lantern hanging from the ceiling like a light, and these beautiful lights that were hanging there. And as I was looking at that light, I had this feeling of like, yes, God is real. God is here. And that was it. It was very simple, but it was just this feeling of security and of peace that I had in that moment. I just knew that God was real.
I feel like there's something about being inside a church that makes it easier for us to perceive God's presence, or hear his voice, or open ourselves up to him.
I mean, God lives everywhere. His dwelling place is all of creation, and inside every person who believes in him. But in our everyday life, it can be hard to remember that. There's so much that competes with our attention. It can be hard to shut it all out and focus on God. He's still there, but it's hard for us to notice sometimes if he's saying something to us. So my discipleship challenge to you this week is go and spend some time in the house of the Lord. Whether that's going to Mass, going to adoration on a Thursday evening, going to confession on a Wednesday evening and praying in the church afterwards, or if you can't go into the church because your family has to be extra cautious about COVID, do the next best thing and get out into God's creation. Find a place where you can be by yourself, Maybe it's a park, maybe it's your backyard, and just sit and spend some time enjoying the beauty of God's creation and knowing that He is there and He sees you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week as we continue with Psalm 84. And next week we're going to talk about these road maps again, that if you went to the website, the Rooted website, on the Lent page of it, there's this road map you can print out and think about where you want to go this Lent. And we're going to bring those up again next week.